Barbara, Laura, and Wendy, and good evening to all of you present here. A very warm welcome. The billionaire investor, Mr. Warren Buffett, has said that women ought to have a higher profile in investing. He has also emphasized on patience for long-term investors. You can't produce a baby in 1 month by getting 9 women pregnant. It is important to be aware of the importance of being patient, quote unquote. Patience is a virtue, and it is found in abundance, I would say, in the DNA of women when it comes to investing and otherwise also. The patience has indeed paid off for us at Millennium Mams. Our mentors, Mr. Vishnu Dhanuka and Mr. Sanjay Bhuvania, have worked effortlessly for the last 28 years to empower more than 4,000 women through financial literacy program. Sir, I would request to you and Sanjay sir to say hi to Wendy, Laura, and Barbara.
Hi. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Three great ladies. 3 great ladies.
It's an honor to meet you. You're doing wonderful work with these ladies.
Yes. Thank you.
We have gone through the grind, I would say, Wendy, Laura, and Barbara, by visiting factories, attending AGMs, nationally and internationally. The Berkshire Hathaway AGM we've attended twice, once in 2012, and then again in 2019, met CEOs of companies, and of course, classroom sessions on equity investing. We have also done a bit in these trying times for the underprivileged through our philanthropic arm, Sahyog, by providing essential supplies to the interiors of West Bengal. Our passion for learning led to having sessions on Zoom. The world may be facing a lockdown, but we have ensured that our spirits are not locked up. This is the first time for Millennium Mams where we have 3 guests who are women from the world of investing and have each carved a niche for themselves. I could not think of a more fitting curtain raiser, I would say, for our event, Going Global, a webinar which will be conducted by our mentor, Mr. Vishnu Dhanuka, introducing women from the world over to the art of investing, to be held tomorrow. Buffett Club. It was started by Mr. Dhanuka in 2010, and we have come a long way to encourage women to enter into long-term investing. Here, without, before I introduce Laura, Barbara, and Wendy, I would request Mr. Dhanuka to say a few words on his vision, how he started this Buffett Club, and a little bit more about Buffett Club, and then I would proceed in introducing.
Namaste to all of you. Actually, the way investors lose money globally, it really pains me. So I thought that the only way we can save the investor from losing money and not creating a big wealth, they're not able to create a big wealth, is to train them the Warren Buffett way. Because I am very successful, because I am following Mr. Warren Buffett way from the last 20 years. So the same thing I wanted to propagate, and that's how we started this Buffett. And now we are taking it on a bigger scale. From tomorrow, we are going global. My dream, and I hope that all the 3 beautiful ladies will support my dream, that to take it to all the investors, particularly women, so that investors are not cheated. I'm using a very strong word, not cheated, and they can also create a big wealth for themselves and ultimately for the society. So please bless me for this new adventure which we have started.
Thank you, Mr. Dhanuka. And without further ado, I will introduce our three very accomplished guests. Our first guest, L.J Rittenhouse. She has mastered the art of predicting future market value of companies by measuring the integrity of CEOs and corporate cultures. The founder of Candor Analytics, she co-authored bestsellers like Investing Between the Lines with the legendary Warren Buffett, and she is one of the founders of Variant Perspectives, which champions the cause of female fund managers. Coming to Wendy, our second guest, she is a CEO and portfolio manager, equity analyst, fundamental analyst, guest expert on CNBC, who has excellent academic credentials and, of course, is a lifelong learner. She has been professionally associated with Mr. Warren Buffett. She is a fee-only registered investment advisor to HNIs with extensive experience in software-based asset allocation, risk management, trading, and research. Our third guest is Barbara Ann Bernard, founder and chief investment officer of Wincrest Capital, who was named one of the top 50 women in hedge funds by Ernst & Young. Her illustrious career started as a summer intern in Templeton. As portfolio manager of Wincrest Contraria Fund, she is a believer of the bottom-up, go, see, and verify method of investing. So before I start, I would like, history was made on the 3rd of May, 2019 at Omaha, when the first ever all-female investment conference took place, organized by 3 women of substance, and 2 are there with us, L.J and Barbara. Our guests today have earned the respect of the legendary investor, Mr. Warren Buffett. And before I request L.J to address our members, I would like to show you some priceless moments captured on camera where L.J, Barbara, and Wendy are with the legendary investor, Mr. Warren Buffett. Just give me a second. Yeah. L.J, would you like to comment?
What we are looking at is the stage of the Hilton Ballroom in Omaha, and it was a great surprise to everyone, including us, when Warren arrived at the ballroom. We had hoped. I had been sending him various messages for the past months to tell him about what we were doing, why it was so important. And also reminding him, as I well knew, that his first wife Susie was such a strong feminist that obviously if she was still alive, she would be at that meeting. Anyway, at the very last minute, we were about ready to start the event, and we heard a commotion in the back of the hall, and there was Warren, and he strode down the aisle like a rock star. He was so excited, he leaped up on the stage. I was a little worried at that point. and he just took it all in, and it was wonderful. It was history making. There you are, Wendy.
Wendy, would you like
Yes.
to comment? Yeah.
This is a memorialization photograph of my first in-person meeting with Warren in his office in Omaha in September of 2008. And I'll be talking about that meeting a little bit later because it was quite memorable.
Wow. Barbara? We would like to listen from you as well. Your experience.
No, it was amazing to meet him, obviously. You know, he's such a wonderful, humble, and sage person. And when he was asked, did he think there was a difference between the way men and women invest, or are men better? He just said, "Are you crazy? The stock doesn't know who owns it." And it was, you know, he was just so supportive. And he said, "There's no reason women shouldn't excel." And I'm shocked that there hasn't been more progress. So when someone like Warren supports your initiative, it really gets it on the map. So we are tremendously grateful to him for his encouragement and support.
And here are a few of our ma'ams with Wendy. Yeah.
And my good friend Gracia, who's in gold, she snuck into the picture.
Oh.
Gracia is a lifelong friend who goes to Omaha with me every year. We
Oh,
make the
wow.
annual pilgrimage together. And it was wonderful to meet you ladies.
Wow. Thank you so
Hopefully
much.
next year,
Yeah, hopefully next
in person.
year. Yes. In person, absolutely.
We hope.
We hope so.
Mhm.
So before I request Laura to start, I would like to introduce my colleague Meghna, who will be taking up the question answers. Meghna,
Yes,
the Vice President of the
thank
organization, and my colleague Meghna, she will be here to conduct the session. And after the address of Laura, and then Wendy and Barbara. Yeah. So should we start? Over to you, Laura.
Yes, I'd be delighted. So it's such a thrill. It's such a thrill to be here today. It's an honor, a thrill, and an incredible opportunity, because what we wanted to start in Omaha is global now, and that's fantastic. I'd like to just give some brief comments to kick off, and I'm going to tell 3 stories to introduce what I care about and what I want to share with you. The titles of the stories are: 1, how Warren Buffett changed my life; secondly, how I want to give you investing superpowers. That's right, superpowers.
Wow.
And finally, is Warren a feminist? Well, that's kind of a spoiler alert. Yes, we know that, but why is he a feminist? Okay, let me jump in. You have to know, oh, by the way, if you notice in the photographs that I was very much a brunette back then, I have a new do right now. I want you to know that my philosophy of life is every day has to be an adventure. And I started before I went to business school. I did things like I worked in an orphanage in Turkey as a Peace Corps volunteer. I built schools in Africa. I worked on a kibbutz in Israel and inoculated chickens and picked oranges. I came back to the States. I helped save poverty programs in the US that were doing an incredible job of making sure that underprivileged women had the proper nutrition for their infant babies and themselves during pregnancy. The government wanted to shut it down. I mobilized people and we kept that program going. So all of that was exciting, but then I realized that in order to really make a difference in the world, you had to have credentials. So I went to get my MBA. I went to Columbia and I realized how much fun business could be. So when I graduated, I went to Lehman Brothers. Now, this was not the Lehman Brothers of 2008, the poster child for terrible management, but it was a very principled company. I was a corporate banker and I had a stable of very wonderful clients. I did complex financings for them. I showed them how they could create wealth in capital markets. And I was there for a decade, and for a number of years, they kept promising me that I would be among the first women to be made partner at the firm. Eventually, I realized those were words that didn't have a lot of support behind them. So I decided to jump into the world of entrepreneurship. And as Rajnaz mentioned just a little while ago, I didn't intend to do this, but I ended up inventing a new methodology to evaluate investments, which I call Candor Analytics. Now, it was very much inspired by Warren. I had in my business, I advised CEOs on how they could realize their full shareholder value potential. And I told them that communications was the most cost-effective way to do that, to be sure that what they stood for, what they produced, how they were aligned with investors would ensure that their stock could be valued properly and at the best levels. So in order for them to see themselves as others saw them, I began analyzing their shareholder letters. And I compared their letters with other CEOs. And my clients said they had no idea when anyone was doing this. It opened their eyes to see what they were missing and what they could do to become more effective leaders. So that led me to read lots of other shareholder letters and begin to develop a methodology. In 1997, I wrote to Warren and I told him about what I was doing. To my surprise, he replied and said, I was doing the work of the angels, which gave me, I was wonderful, but I was never quite sure which angel he was referring to. Was it the angel of vengeance or the angel of birth? But I was thrilled, especially when he invited me to join him at the 1998 shareholder meeting in Omaha. So I went, and I've been to every meeting since. Now, how important is candor to Warren? Why did I choose candor? Well, if some of you may have read Buffett's Bites, and on page, I don't know how many of you know about the owner's manual, but it's one of his most important documents, but most people don't read it. I'd write about it in this book, but it lays out the principles by which they manage Berkshire. And principle number 12, Warren promises, we will be candid in our reporting to you, emphasizing the pluses and minuses important in appraising business value. The CEO who misleads others in public may eventually mislead themselves in private. So you can see what kind of risk that entails. Now, how can learning about Candor Analytics give you investing superpowers? Well, it starts with this premise. Think about it. I have had so many conversations with investors who say to me, I don't care about the words. How can I trust the words? I rely on the numbers. And I reply and I say, yes, numbers are very precise in the way words are not. But are the numbers accurate? You need to understand and read the words to know how much you can trust those numbers. And that's what the system that I've invented does. It gives us a measure of how much you can trust those numbers. So how do we do that? Well, we focus on words because, let's face it, words are how we create our future. Without words, we have no future. We don't know what we're doing. So words are so important. Now, how can words tell us about value? So you remember Enron. Many of us remember Enron. Well, their last annual report came out in 2000. And as I was reading the shareholder letter, I realized that the net income number they reported in their letter didn't match the audited accounting number. And so, in fact, it was, they claimed they made $1.3 billion, but if you looked at the audited statement, it was only 979 billion, not 1.3 trillion. So, when we went to see what would account for the difference between this, what we found was that there was a subsidiary called Azurix Water Company, which turned out to be the subsidiary where all of the funking accounting was, and the earnings of that business was included in the net income number that they reported in their letter, which got them to the 1.3 billion. So That was interesting. And in fact, at the time we found that, the stock was trading at $60 a share. I advised people at that point that they might want to take another look at the stock. By December, the stock was trading at 60 cents a share. Now that's a dramatic example, but I could tell you other stories. In fact, Microsoft is a positive story. In 2014, when Satya Nadella took over, the company had always scored in towards the bottom of my survey. That year, his company, his letter, catapulted to the top 25. And that was the year. If you had bought the stock, you would have seen an appreciation of 342% to today. So it is tremendously revealing. In fact, each year we create a theoretical portfolio of the top quartile of companies in our survey. And what I've found for over a decade, that portfolio produces returns that on average are 2 times greater than the market consistently, no matter what kind of market we are in. So there's a powerful correlation. Now, let me end with the last question. Is Warren a feminist? Well, of course, we've already seen the pictures when he came into our meeting in the ballroom. His history was made. I looked out over the audience. I said, "What do you think about this, Warren?" He said, way overdue to see all these women investors in one room. Now, Barbara Ann Bernard has done some amazing work to bring attention to a really appalling fact. And that is that in this country, in our country, only 3% of all the investment funds are owned by women and non-diverse managers. So, but by diverse managers. So this is something that people don't know about. And it's such a disconnect because in our country, approximately 60 to 65% of the women actually control the wealth. It's just that they're not investing with other women. So that is something that we are currently bringing attention to. And I'm thrilled to be able to see how we as partners can collectively bring global attention to these facts. So I have three investment tips that I think are the ones that I've learned the most from Warren. Okay, one is that trust is everything. And that's why I wrote, do business with people you can trust. And also buy filet mignon at hamburger prices in today's volatile markets. That's a very useful tip to follow. And finally, be the change you want to see, do the right thing. And I think that's his legacy. Last of all, what Warren has done is create a new kind of, I think, company, a new kind of investment category, and that is principle-based capitalism. He runs his companies by principles, and that serves the needs of the stakeholders. He's created the Billionaires Club, which is now has included hundreds of billionaires who also have promised to leave their fortunes to the good of the world. So I'm thrilled to meet the ma'ams. I remember every time in Omaha when I would hear a commotion, wherever I was in the bookstore or at one of the cocktail parties, I could see Rachna and the ladies walking through, making themselves known.
We named our group Squad 29 of us.
And you made yourself known. So thank you for offering us this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Laura. Yeah, next, Wendy. Wendy, I would request you to please come and give a press.
Sure. I also do want to say thank you so much for inviting me to speak with these distinguished analysts. And it was an honor to meet your Force 29 in Omaha last year. And again, I hope we do get to meet again in person sometime soon. But you're a really sharp bunch of ladies, and I love the work that you're doing. And you're training yourselves to be securities analysts, which I think is amazing, you know, from the ground up. And keep it up. I'm so proud of you. I really am.
Thank you.
Yeah, with Mr. Bishnu's help. I will have a story to tell you about my first meeting with Warren, but I'm going to save that a little bit. I just wanted to dovetail off of a couple of things Laura just said, though, because they just reminded me of a few things that are important to me. One of my favorite Buffett quotes is, "I deplore false precision in math." And that very much to me speaks to the games that can be played in the numbers that you see in annual reports and quarterly reports. And they're not always to be trusted. Certainly, Laura is the expert on that. But I love that quote because I think it's very meaningful. You can really convince yourself of a lot of things that might make you feel better based on numbers you see that are not honest at all. The other thing I was poking around for a couple of moments ago was Laura was talking about Enron. And I have somewhere in fairly close proximity, but I couldn't put my finger on it, one of the last analysts' reports that came out from Merrill Lynch about Enron. Of course, they're a buy side, or sell side rather, but it was a securities report, and it was a strong buy, and it was in late October of the year that they failed. 6 weeks later, they were bankrupt. And I keep that as a reminder to not trust what you necessarily always see and read. So let me tell you how I first became aware of Warren Buffett. When in the 1980s, I was in graduate school getting my business degree in finance, my master's degree. And I remember talking to my classmates about him, and he wasn't very highly known around the world at that time. But we remember just talking about him and marveling at his record, which was becoming quite well known. At the time, an A share, not a B share, one A share of the company was about 2,000 United States dollars. Today it's close to 300,000. And of course, we were all wishing as graduate students that we could just buy one share. And of course, we're poor, broke students, yes? So none of us had that kind of money. And I still live to regret that I could not afford to buy one share back in 1980, 82. And when I did finally have money to invest, I became a Berkshire shareholder. And that is when I started attending the AGMs. And that led to me on my journey to Omaha to meet Warren, okay? But I'm getting ahead of myself, all right? Here's some of the reasons I admire Warren, and they're pretty simple, but I love that he says you should buy a stock, a company, and as if the stock market is going to close for 5 years or 10 years. It's the right way to think. And I think that's one of the reasons I first connected with him. He's been a mentor to me since before we met, long before we met, because I am inherently a value investor, and I guess I just didn't know it at the time. Do you have TJ Maxx stores in India, or have any of your ladies shopped in TJ Maxx stores? Not familiar with that? It's a discount store that carries high quality goods that are obtained from very, very fancy stores, department stores that are much more expensive. And what TJ Maxx does is buys the excess from all these different fancy department stores. Well, what I've always liked to say is I'm a TJ Maxx shopper. I'm not a Nordstrom shopper. And Nordstrom's here in this country is a high-priced store. So I've always been a value investor because you can find the same values at TJ Maxx that are at Nordstrom's and other stores like it for much higher prices. So the long-term orientation to Warren, that Warren has is very meaningful to me. Having said that, though, Warren admits his mistakes. The most recent example is, of course, selling the airline stocks that he kind of foolishly bought a few years ago, after he said a few years prior that he would never do that again. He is willing to take in, at the age of almost 90, new information and absorb it and help it to inform his worldview, and he changes his methodology and thought process accordingly. And because he's a lifelong learner. And I think that is so important. There's nothing worse than, getting into a methodology and getting stuck in it. And the world changes daily, as we know. So that is something that means a great deal to me. And of course, Mr. Munger is a lifelong learner. He is just the most brilliant man to listen to. I was sorry he was not at this year's AGM to give us his wisdom. Warren is loyal and kind. He really is. I can say this from personal experience. From a distance, I think we all like to imagine that he is exactly the person that he presents to the world. And he is. And that's what really is, I think, a wonderful thing, because I get angry when people kind of lump him in with all the other millionaires and billionaires in the world and say, oh, they're all hypocrites. They're doing things at our expense. They're not putting their money where their mouth is, that kind of thing. I've never experienced, seen, or heard about any behavior, personally or from a distance, that Warren has engaged in publicly and privately that was not completely consistent with who he is. If you've read the biography of him that was written a number of years ago, The Snowball, I mean, you'll know that he is far from perfect, but he is genuine. And I'm telling you that from the bottom of my heart. I also get angry when people say, and this has happened multiple times in my 30-plus year career in investing, he's lost his touch. He's lost his touch. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. Well, value investing goes in and out of style, and there's periods of time where it's extremely successful and times when it's, not so great. But in the long run, it is my conviction, my strong conviction and belief that it's the right way to think. So I think it pays off to think that way. Just checking my notes. I don't want to skip around too much. My thoughts tend to go in lots of directions. So let me tell you a little bit about my first meeting with him, because it was kind of amazing, given the circumstances. I attended my first AGM in 2008. Okay. I have all my badges from the meetings.
Wow.
I haven't missed one since. And
good collection, Wendy.
I have a good collection. Yeah. This would have been year 13, I believe. Yeah. And one of the things that was asked, the shareholders get to ask questions, was, and my memory of this is not going to be precise, but I'm going to tell you how I interpreted it and how it made me feel. The question was, it was either a student or a young teacher who was an introvert, a shy person, very probably similar to how Warren was. Everyone probably knows the story about Warren being so terrified of public speaking that he backed out of a few things, and finally he went and took a course on public speaking, and he forced himself to go out there. And the question that the student or teacher, a young person asked was, what is your recommendation for someone who has an introverted personality that wants to get ahead? And the one piece of advice he always gives, and I think he gave it then, was make sure you know how to write well and communicate well. Writing well is thinking well. Okay, the two go together. But the most important thing he said was, you can be the most wonderful, excellent, intelligent person, exceptional person in the world, but people are not going to necessarily realize that, especially if you're shy and retiring. You can't expect the world to just say, oh, this is a person very worthy of doing business with or spending time with. You kind of have to push yourself out there, okay? Not in an aggressive way, but you have to force yourself to do things maybe that you don't necessarily want to do. So I took that to heart. And I am also an introvert, although it may be hard to tell. And I have always had to force myself to kind of put myself out in the public eye. And okay, end result of that story is I took his answer to that question to heart, and I wrote to him. And I said, look, I'm exactly that person you were talking about. And I told him a little bit about myself, and I asked him for something in the letter, and I will not tell you what it is, but he wrote back. He refused my request, but he said, I like how you write, please keep writing to me. So we started corresponding, and Warren very much likes writing mail, the kind that goes physically to you with a stamp on it. And so we became pen pals, as they call it. And finally, after a few exchanges about investing and a few other things, I mustered up the nerve to say, can I come and see you next time I'm headed to the West? And he said, sure. Now, I think we made the arrangement to meet in early August of 2008. Things were starting to kind of fall apart in the financial world, but not quite so dramatically as they did in September. So my meeting with him had been scheduled for late September. It was right after Lehman Brothers failed. The prior week, Lehman Brothers had failed. So knowing that my meeting with him was far from crucial and that he was probably extremely busy with what was going on, I contacted his assistant and said, is he still going to be able to see me? And she said, oh, sure, you're on his schedule. Nope, come on out. So I did. And I was expecting to get a 5-minute hello, picture opportunity, a handshake. Well, I spent about 40, 45 minutes with him. He couldn't have been more gracious. And this is in the middle of the biggest financial crisis we've known in our lifetimes. We've had others, but this was a biggie. And what was interesting was that it was clear in our conversation, he didn't know what was going to happen. He was not confident that we were going to get through this period. He didn't say it in as many words, but I could tell that there was a great deal of uncertainty. But he was doing his thing. I apologize, I forgot to turn my phone off if you can hear that ringing. So we spent quite a bit of time talking. We went into his office, sat down, had a private chat. I learned many things I have never read or heard from him. To this day that I don't think have ever been made public, not inside information by any means, just things that he felt comfortable to share. So I was thinking, well, this is great. Our meeting is probably going to end very soon. But he switched gears and said, well, tell me about your business. And I have to admit to a very terrible thing. I don't know if you have the phrase elevator speech. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't have my 30-second elevator speech prepared, so I could knock him off his feet. I was like, oh my gosh, he's asking me about me. I figured he would just talk and I'd leave. And so I fumbled a little bit. And then, of course, he did know a little bit about how I did what I did. And I recovered and talked about it some more. And he interrupted me at the end of my little soliloquy and said, just keep doing what you're doing. That meant the world to me. And that got me through that period, because it just, I don't think he would say it insincerely. And it really helped me get through what is now the second most difficult period in my financial. Right now, I think is the first, but we won't get into that. So I was so surprised that he took the time to find out more about me. And I had, during my conversation with him, I had said, well, I was thinking about changing some things about how I did my business because of the environment. And again, he said, just keep doing what you're doing. You should be fine. And that sustained me. So after about 40 to 45 minutes, he said, I'm sorry, I really have to go back to work. I'm expecting a phone call. And the next morning, so we shook hands and left, took our pictures. And the next morning it was announced that he had given loaned Goldman Sachs the $5 billion that they needed at 10%, that's a sweet deal that he made. So my joke, and this is a joke, was that Warren was just about to give me the $5 billion to manage, but then Goldman called and they needed it more. So that's what I tell people. That was 12 years ago, and we've maintained a professional relationship, and I've seen him several times in person, including on his birthdays, and it's just been great for me. And I just want to encourage all of you to follow his teachings and just know that he's the wonderful person that you think he is.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. It was a wonderful story you narrated. And now Barbara, I would like to call Barbara, founder and chief investment officer of Wincrest Capital. Over to you, Barbara.
Well, these are very hard stories to follow. Thanks, ladies. I just loved listening to both of them. It was fantastic. I'm grinning ear to ear. So yeah, I don't have anything as quite prepared as Laura and Wendy did, but what I can tell you is I love that you are value investors because we are a dying breed. And I can pick up on so many of the things you said, Wendy, but I think we all know that you make your money when you buy. And so as a value investor, one of the hardest things is trying to determine the difference between volatility and permanent impairment of capital. And just this morning, I read a quote that actually Sir John's granddaughter published, and it's one I hadn't seen from Sir John before. And the quote was, "The only certainty about the future is that it will be different from the past." And I thought, wow, that's really great. So Sir John Templeton was my mentor. I started working for him when I was in high school. And at the time, I had got this scholarship to study in Hong Kong at a boarding school, and it was 1997. You had the handover of Hong Kong, you had the Asian financial crisis, and I have a letter writing story too, but it's about Sir John, who shared the value investment principles of Warren Buffett. Sir John was very interested in religion, and he had respect for every religion, and in fact has the largest prize in the world. It's called the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion. Mother Teresa was the first recipient. But when I was backpacking through Vietnam, I came across the Cao Dai Temple, where there were 4 religions praying concurrently, and they were in different colored robes depending on their religion. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I took a photo of it. And I sent the photos to Sir John, and I wrote him a letter, and I just said, I thought you'd find it very interesting to see these religions, cohabitating and celebrating and worshiping together. Isn't this beautiful? He wrote me back a letter and returned the photo, saying, I know how much this photo means to you. Who returns the photo? I mean, these men have such character, all right, Wendy? And the things you were saying about Warren, I could say about Sir John. Just, he was who he was on TV, as he was to an intern, and just that generosity of spirit and authenticity is something I've never forgotten and certainly aspire to. So back to the value investing. One of the questions that came up with in our séjour with Warren last year is, to the point, had he lost his touch, Wendy? The question was posed, is there a difference between value investing and growth investing? And Warren said, there is no difference at all. All investing is value investing. And what he meant by that was growth at a discount is value. And the reason I want to touch on that is what this pandemic has caused is it has absolutely accelerated disruption and exacerbated inequality. And so when you're trying to figure out what's the difference between permanent impairment of capital and volatility, you have to sort of keep in mind the future might look different, right? And one of the things I had to do in my portfolio, and this goes to your point, Wendy, of intellectual honesty, was capitalism is not built on zero sales assumptions. It doesn't work. So I had to go through my portfolio and I took out anything that wasn't open because we don't know when it's going to open and how it's going to open. So if you look at a PVR Cinemas or a SpiceJet, is that model permanently impaired? Any business model that was built on density is challenged. So is that value, right? And so this is what's tricky. And this is why the quant and algos will never get what we do, because there's judgment involved. You know, so that was, you know, and then like you, I love that you guys go to the shareholder meetings and meet management teams. 100%. I do the same thing. I say we get what we inspect, not what we expect. I walk factory floors. I spent a ton of time in India. I had about 20% of my fund in India. We're in Egypt, we're in Bangladesh, we're in China, I mean, you name it. There isn't a country that I will shy away from, but because we go and we kick those tires. So COVID has been devastating to me, right? I'm on Zoom calls with all the management teams, but it's not quite the same, right? So we have to all adapt. And so whether it's having, you know, the intellectual honesty to say, I love this company, but that model is impaired. And I'll give you an example of that. We owned a gym company in Saudi Arabia, Jam. This company was a gem. The founding family owned 20% of it. It had a great balance sheet. It was growing. I mean, it was just, but that model is permanently impaired. When you go back to the gym, you are going to have one of two machines there, and they're probably only going to let in 30 to 40% of the people at a time. That model wasn't built on those assumptions. So that's not value. The other thing I'd like to get to is the difference and I love when you guys said you're long-term investors, and I know your average holding period is about 10 years. That's fantastic. It's an incredible advantage because most people are investing for the quarter, not the quarter century. So what does value mean? Sir John Templeton would have told you value was when a stock was off 80%. That's like a Carnival cruise ship right now. And you notice the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund is buying it. Now, why? How do they justify that? Well, no, they're going to have a terrible quarter. But will the business model be here in a quarter century? Probably. And they have that view. They're not reporting to, you know, investors who can redeem weekly, monthly, daily, right? So, so I think time is a real advantage. But with that, you have to have investors that understand that. So I think during this period, communicating with your investors has been really, really important. And so, yeah, I think I've kind of touched on some of the things I wanted to say. You know, the other thing that just really bugs me is, and Warren and I might differ on this one. He's a big fan of index investing. Right now, I mean, 50% of the world is indexed to a recession. And after this, I wonder if they'll think that was so smart. They can't underweight hotels. They can't underweight airlines. They can't, right? Commercial real estate is going to be challenged after this, no question. And so I think active stock picking, exactly what you are doing, the way you are doing, is going to be a huge advantage. So I laud and applaud you, women. I hope we all do very well out of this. And I'm just really excited for you. And thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Barbara and Laura and Wendy. A very warm welcome to all three of you. It's an honor to have you here, and hearing your insights and the lovely stories you shared about Mr. Warren Buffett was fantastic. So with your due permission, can I start the question answer session?
Absolutely.
All right. So I'll take the first question and then I'll open it up to the rest of the floor. So my first question is open to all three of you. Mr. Warren Buffett's famous teaching is be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. So how easy or hard is it for you to follow this?
For me, it's easy. Because it's easy. If you have your list of I'm not ready, I have these wonderful companies, I'm not ready to buy them, whether because of margin of safety or or it's just not in value range. This is, you're absolutely right, Barbara. This is an amazing, wonderful time.
Right. And what about you, Wendy?
I think if you have the right psychological makeup and the emotional intelligence to not freak out like some of our clients may do, quite frankly, when things turn south like they are now and are difficult, if your constitution is such that you don't panic ever, you will do very well, and you keep a clear head. That's
Great.
the best I can say about that.
Thank you, Wendy. And what about you, Barbara? Would you like to
I agree
elaborate more
wholeheartedly.
on this?
I agree wholeheartedly. You can't have different returns if you do everything the way everyone else is. If you just take my industry, 90% of the assets are with 10% of the managers. That's 90% of the people doing the same thing, expecting a different result, and then having the audacity to say the industry is appalling and underperforming. No, you're just a bad investor, right? So that stock manager picker. But no, so I'm always comfortable, more comfortable when I'm doing things that aren't. I'm uncomfortable if it's consensual, right? So, but that's just that's my DNA. I grew up with the contrarian of contrarian investors. So, but how do you get comfortable? Right. And how I get comfortable is I am obsessed with finding alignment of interest, which is why I go into the management teams. Right. So I want skin in the game. I want in 80% of our companies in the portfolio, the founder is still the CEO or largest shareholder. You know, net cash balance sheets. You don't want to avoid binary risk. You want to avoid leverage. Right. So if you want alignment of interest, you want to have done your homework. I'm a big fan of building LBO models, like private valuations of companies. If a company trades below where it does in the private market, I have a margin of safety, because if the public market isn't valuing it correctly, private equity will, right? And so all of those things I've just said kind of make me lean towards the mid-cap sector, because that's where I find the greatest, confluence of those influences.
Thank you for the insights. I'll just open up the floor now. Can we have Sunita Bulchandani? She has a question.
This is for Barbara. Barbara, you mentioned something about, finding out that the model is impaired of the company. Could you throw some more light on it? You said something about machines, few machines being in. I don't know if
it's sort of a more generic idea, but there were some business models that were built on the requirement of a critical mass, right? Because anything with a high fixed cost, right, that has high operating leverage, if you don't meet your cost, you're losing money. Okay, so I read a stat that, it's like 50 to 75% of the restaurants would go out of business, right? They're not built to have tables 6 feet apart. Their financial model was on much more density. They have to serve many more meals, right? Hotels. I'm here in the Bahamas. They're talking about hotels maybe opening in October, because if you open a hotel but there's only one guest, you have the security guard, you have the lights, you have the elevator, you have which restaurant, right? So there's some business models that need a certain, a certain quantity of mass to work, right? Like a cruise ship, a cinema company, the gym. They were all so. And again, like if we got a vaccine and we could go back to the density assumptions, the sales assumptions that business models were built on, then that would be different. But I don't think I don't know when, and I can't invest with an unknown variable. Right? To when. And so the other thing is, so one of my concerns is when you do open up, like retail sales in China are up 40%. So as long as you're closed, a lot of these retailers have just said, we're not paying rent. And they're not paying their staff, right? So at least you sort of stop the bleeding. The minute you open, and you open all day and you've got staff there and the lights, and now you've got to pay your rent, but you've only sold one shirt. Now you're really losing money. So all of these are unknown variables. And I personally think the market is ahead of itself. And
Yes.
that there's euphoria that, oh, yay, we're opening up. But you can open up, but what if no one comes?
Yes. Thank you.
Right.
Thank
We
you.
should take care of the euphoria for sure. Thank you, Barbara. Can we have Sirisha in for the next question, please?
Hi, I'm Sirisha, and I got introduced to Buffett and his wonderful principles in the year 2010. I was there in 2012 AGM. I think Mr. Buffett is a woman because of the biggest virtue of his patience. Now, I'd like to ask all of you as investors, you can, like what Warren Buffett says, that you can make a good deal, you can turn a good deal into a bad one by paying a wrong price. So what has been your tries with patience and your tries with waiting for the price to come to the reasonable level? What's your advice?
Yeah, Laura can come in.
First of all, I'm so glad you asked the question because I want to show this book. I don't know if any of you have read this book.
Wow.
I want to see, tell me what you think. I want to see this book republished as Warren Buffett Invests Like a Woman.
Wow.
True.
I mean, this is another, this is one of the things that if you go to my Forbes.com blog, I will get into the question, but one of the things that got lost in this year's annual meeting at Berkshire was the introduction of the concept of unconscious bias in the shareholder proxy that was introduced by Scott Stringer, the controller of New York City, who, by the way, the week before, we were going to give him an award at a conference for his pioneering work in increasing the percentage of pension funds allocated to emerging managers, female and diverse. So, it was clear that Warren it wasn't well recognized. But anyway, my point is, I think there are certain advantages. What's interesting about this book are the advantages that women bring to investing that are very much a part of the kind of the value methodology. Tell me the question again. The question was.
My question is your tries with patience, the virtue of patience, waiting for the right price. Once you find it.
That's it. You have to find that point at which, I mean, I've looked at the portfolio of stocks that we have that we follow. I have both financial metrics and linguistic metrics, and it's possible. It's easy to see if the price has gone down and the cultural dynamics have gone up. That's a good sign, and the reverse of that is a sign that it's perhaps time to sell. I don't know if that makes sense when I use the term linguistic metrics. If I see that there's an increase in the truth-telling, in the integrity of the strategy, the execution of the strategy, all of those things, those are all positive signs. And if the stock has been declining, those are incredible value opportunities.
So I go as far, I keep a list of stocks I would love to own if for whatever reason they got cheap. And sometimes macro volatility creates micro opportunity. And I can give you several examples of that in our portfolio. We bought a company called EDU is the ticker, and it's New Oriental Education, which is online. It's tutoring in China. I'd always admired that stock. I'd met them for years, but I would get a nosebleed trying to pay the multiple it was demanding. It was down 50% on some news that the government was going to demand that all the tutors had proper certification, and they were, anyway. My variant perspective on that news was that was actually good for the largest player, because I phoned them and 98.8% of their teachers did have the certificates. The few that didn't had to go back to their province to get it, and that would put them on pops, so anyway, we've made, God, 150% on that stock, but it was something that I'd loved forever, but never could pay that price. So I think it's a very good discipline when you meet a company that you think, God, that's just great, but too rich. Just wait. And I can't tell you when, but one day, you know, you might wake up and something will have happened and some news. I did it with PVR Cinemas. Do you remember when they said they were going to not let you, they were going to say you could bring your own food in? Okay, well in PVR in India, that's a stock I'd always loved. And the government put out this, there was this silly article in your newspaper that said, we are going to enable people to bring in their own food and drink to the cinemas. Well, that would fundamentally change that business model. Cinema companies make a lot of money on the concessionary sales. So I researched it and I said, actually, cinemas have a restaurant license. So now are you going to say you can bring your own food to restaurants? It's not going to happen. So we bought PVR then.
And Barbara, I read that you had actually gone and counted the footfall in the PVR cinemas as well.
Oh yeah,
that is fantastic. That is like hardcore research, Barbara. And on this topic, I wanted to ask all three of you, you know, you all have done phenomenally in a man's world. You all have broken the glass ceiling. You all have shattered the glass ceiling. So what is the driving force behind all of you? All three of you, I want to know this.
Wendy.
Yeah, Wendy.
I have a passion for this work. I discovered it early in life, and it was what I was meant to do. And like Warren, I never plan to retire unless I lose my health, physical or mental. I will do this until I die. I just want to go back to what Siri was asking also, though. I think we all have lists of stocks, companies we want to buy at certain prices, and it's like your wish list. The thing I've learned is that you can't go, oh, I wanted to buy it, I missed it, and then you start chasing it at a price that's far beyond what you should be paying for it. You always get a second chance. I have never found this to not be true if you're patient enough. Great example recently is Disney. Disney at $80 on March 23rd or thereabouts was a wonderful value. Visa also in that time frame. Yes, they're not going to be making as much money in the near term as they will when people do start going out and spending and traveling. But at $135, I was very excited about it. So just remember, you'll get another chance. And sometimes, most of the time, the best thing to do is nothing.
Wow. Sure. So patience and passion from Wendy. What about you, Laura? What is your driving force?
Driving force is just passion for people. I think humanity is such an interesting phenomenon.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. I've been doing a lot of video watching of Sadhguru during this time. Who's heck bent on making human beings more human.
Right.
And greater beings. But this is what I'll tell you what I do. The CEOs who score highest in my survey, I often consider them as honorary women because they have all those characteristics. That's not an insult, right?
Absolutely.
It's a great honor. But they have all the characteristics. They're empathetic. They listen. They show emotion. They not just have intellectual, financial intelligence, but emotional intelligence, and it's so wonderful. Imagine those qualities, which are often associated with women. Those are the qualities that are represented among a group of the highest performing CEOs that we cover. It's fantastic. We are powerful. And I think the one thing I would say, just as a warning and as an opportunity, is that for some strange reason, men find us very threatening.
Yes, I agree with you there, Laura, wholeheartedly. Very well said.
That would require a whole nother Zoom call to go through that.
I wish we could take you up, or we would love to take you up for that as well, Laura. We need that. All of us women out here.
So this is the best call ever.
It's going out loud and clear on Facebook Live.
The men better not be watching then.
You know, I would echo, it's the same thing as you girls said. If you're passionate, you don't need to be pushed, you're pulled. I actually don't think I work. I just do what I love to do all day long, every day. If you tell me I can't, I'm really upset. Right? That's so follow your heart. And it's a phenomenal career, though. I mean, women are great students. Right. And if you're intellectually curious and you want to learn for a living, like Wendy said, we want to do this forever. I mean, and the world is always changing. There's always something to learn. So, you know, if you're bored yourself, start reading something you care about. Just hit it, you know.
But let's not forget, we have a serious issue in the fact of the lack of women in this field. I mean, when you know, concentration. I know, Barbara, you brought this to my attention. The fact that two firms in our country control, what is it, 80% of the trades? That the concentration, it's not allowing for every CEO will tell you how important diversity is. We want diversity in our teams. We want diversity. They don't want to see it in the financial world. Very interesting.
Right. And how do you see the participation of women increasing? Like, do you see it changing much, or it's still slow?
Sadly, no. And this is, you know, you like to say don't waste a good pandemic, but Laura gave you a stat that 3% of the firms have diverse ownership. They manage 1% of the assets. So just let that sink in for a minute. It's not that they're not trying, it's that they're not getting to scale. And so the reason this is dangerous is we need cognitive diversity. And and it's not that these managers underperform, they outperform. Right. And so the big are getting bigger. 90% of the assets in my industry are managed by 10% of the firms. So this is a problem for all emerging managers, but it is exacerbated amongst female managers because so many of us are emerging, right? So if you do the Venn diagram of women, most of us are in that emerging category. And so I'm terrified that this pandemic is going to erase a lot of our progress. And the reason I'm terrified is because most of the firms run by women are subscale, which means they are subsidizing the operations until they get to an inflection of AUM, assets under management. And what this social distancing has done is it has put fundraising on hold for everybody. People aren't able to conduct their operational due diligence, right? They're not able. So the name of the game for any emerging manager right now is slash all your costs. You have to extend your runway. And if you can't survive this, you can't thrive on the other side. So that's what I've been, you know, trying to tell all the emerging managers, because I mean, I really think it would be a shame if
we decline,
even more concentrated after this. You know, I have an idea that actually when the problems get so bad, they actually become an opportunity. And I have this idea that I mean, we have to rethink everything. And we don't know how long the social distancing is going to go on, if there's a second wave, and at some point business has to carry on. So is there an opportunity to centralize operations? So reduce the fixed costs for small managers, and so that there's one central place where someone can go conduct due diligence, and then the manager can be wherever. So you have a hub and spoke model, because that is what's happening today. I was talking to Morgan Stanley and BTIG yesterday. No one's working in New York right now. They're all at their homes. And I said to BTIG, when do you think you'll be coming back to your office? They said, we don't know. Maybe next year. So is there a new model here where we can have hub and spoke? I don't know. You know, so there are always opportunities in crisis.
Right. Thank you, Barbara. And I'd like to get in Abhilasha for a question, please.
Thank you. My question is actually for all three of you, but Laura, you had mentioned a tip that we should do business with people we trust. So how do we learn to trust someone, and how do you guys know how to trust a person or a company? What is your take on that? Like, what is the analysis that you guys do?
You definitely need to, this is the first book I did with Warren, Do Business with People You Can Trust. And it was based on an email that he sent to his employees after 9/11. And he said, well, he's trying to calm everybody down, give them confidence. And he said, well, concerned about the insurance businesses and wanting to reassure people. And he said, well, our underwriting, we have underwriting discipline, we consider all kinds of risks, but remember, you have to do business with people you can trust. If you do not, you will lose money. And this is one thing where we women have an opportunity, because we are known to be highly intuitive. We have a greater access to our emotions, and I'm sure that every woman, and you know what, there are men that have high degree of emotionality too, and they're also got an advantage. But you can kind of know when you're with somebody, this is somebody I can trust or not. And every time I've gotten into trouble is when I violate that rule. And I've met somebody and I said, well, I should really like this person, whether it's because of who they know, their resume, whatever, and then I'll say, okay, well, I'll trust them. And 9 times out of 10, that is a bad move. So I really have learned to trust my instincts. In fact, I have a funny story about being on a burning airplane because of that, but I won't get into that now.
That sounds interesting, Laura.
Wow, Laura, seriously, you're like a Pandora box of stories. We would love to know so much more from you. And we've heard that you work with organizations to bring about more candor in them as well. How was that experience?
It's so much fun. It's so much fun. And I think, I'm so happy you asked me that question, because my experience is it's people, human beings really want to be candid, because what is it? It's authentic. It's authentic to who we are. It's truth. Right. We are in our power when we honor and acknowledge our authenticity, our uniqueness as an individual. And what happens is fear gets in the way. We're afraid to show who we are. And whenever fear takes over, you're in trouble. You're in trouble.
Right.
No,
Absolutely.
So that's what I think about that. I said, trust your instincts and know it's the right thing to do. People say to me, well, I think I like them. I said, well, can you really trust them? Well, I don't know. Well, then forget about it.
If I can add to that, Laura?
Yes, please.
This is a quickie, but our president, Ronald Reagan, from many decades ago, had a saying, trust but verify, right? I think he got it backwards. My mantra is verify, then trust, maybe. And as Laura points out, your gut, your instincts go a long way, but checking out the numbers and the concrete things that you can prior to simply placing your trust in an institution, a person, a company, I think it's misplaced if you trust first. And I'm a New Yorker. I guess we don't trust anybody. So, not right off the bat, right, Laura?
We do learn to trust. We're cautious.
Yes.
It's realistic. You know what? And I guess, I'm going to say something kind of frou-frou-y. I think as human beings, we really do want to be good and do the right thing. And then we get messed up. We just get messed up. There are some seriously evil, not well-intentioned people out there, but I don't think they're not anywhere near the majority. So, and I think, when you can trust, when you do smart trust, not stupid trust, smart trust, it's actually like a virus. It's contagious. Because there's something, there's like it's a phenome of, when you can relax, you just know. Oh, that's like, it's what, it's that great quote about Warren. So someone asked him, Warren, how do you know that you can trust somebody? He said, it's like what the Supreme Court said in their case on pornography. You just know. Just know.
I find that good people tend to find each other as well. You will attract what you put out and what you are. And I have met many, many wonderful people that way.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for all the takeaways. We have so many more questions, but we value your time. So I'm going to hand it over to Rachna Prasad, our president now, for the vote of thanks. Over to you, Rachna.
Thank you, Meghna. Thank you so much, Laura, Barbara, and Wendy. There's so much to learn from you, but time is running out. Learning investing superpowers from Laura and investing principles and that piece of advice, trust your instincts. Thank you so much, Laura. And Wendy, for sharing your invaluable insights and treasured moments with Warren. Thank you, Barbara, for your advice on value investing. Like, it can go on and on with this session. We can go really, it will be treasured forever in the history of Millennium Mams, I would say.